We are starting on part 3. Part 3. Oh, I've got the wrong book. Sorry about that. We're still on volume 1. Yeah, so these books, it's a long journey, almost a year of reading these books. Yeah, so we are on part 3 of volume 1. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, so part 3, we are starting the stories about Noah and the flood. I think we're going to enjoy this. I've been waiting for these stories for a while. The stories about Noah and the flood. So we'll start with story 1 today. It says, sad, bad days. Sad, bad days. That's the very first story. You can find it in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 to 7. So before we start, we'll just pray. Good morning, dear Jesus. This day is for you. I ask you to bless all I think, say, and do. Amen. Okay, so story 1, volume 1, part 3, story 1. Sad, bad days. Though Enoch walked with God, most of Adam's children and grandchildren did not. They walked by themselves and forgot all about him. They became selfish and greedy, quarrelsome and cruel. They began to fight among themselves and kill each other, like Cain had killed Abel. How could things like this happen so soon after creation week and the peace and harmony of Eden? It is hard to understand until we remember that even today, boys and girls are sometimes cross and unruly right after church. Some can become real little pests just as soon as a nice picnic is over. It doesn't take long for some people to forget God's kindness. It doesn't take long for some people to forget God's kindness and love, even though they should always remember it. That was how it was in the early days of the world. As people drifted further and further from God, they drifted further and further into sin. Satan was very happy at the way things were turning out. He was the one who, in the shape of a snake, had deceived Adam and Eve in the garden. He had schemed to spoil God's plans for a happy and beautiful world. And now he was succeeding much better than he had dared to hope. Of course, Satan had heard God's promise that Eve's offspring would crush his head, but he made up his mind that nothing like that would ever happen. The best way to do this, he thought, would be to lead Adam's children to disobey God and do all sorts of things displeasing to him. The more people you could get to disobey God, the better. So Satan began to plant all kinds of bad ideas in the minds of Adam's children. Those who were not living close to God fell for his deceitful suggestions. Adam and Eve knew all about the terrible things that happened when people disobeyed God. They tried their best to warn their disobedient boys and girls of the danger. They talked again and again about the good way that leads to life. Year after year and century after century, they stood against the rising of evil, but it was a losing struggle. The wicked people became more and more proud and bold in their wickedness and made fun of what Adam said. They told him that he was too old-fashioned to understand young people. They grumbled every time he tried to help them keep good rules. Adam lived to see many sinful people living in his once beautiful and peaceful world. Just before he died, he heard Enoch, the man who walked with God, scold the grumblers and fault-finders who followed their own wicked feelings for their ungodly acts. That was about 900 years after creation. Things had become even worse 500 years later. By this time, people quarreled and fought everywhere. Nobody's life was safe. The Bible says the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. How sad that the world had turned out to be like this. God had done much to make it a place of beauty, peace, and joy. Now Satan had almost ruined everything. How sorry God must have been. The Bible says that the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. In those last few words, we can catch just a glimpse of God's deep, deep sadness. He was thinking of what the world would have been like if Adam and Eve had not listened to the snake, and all their children had left him and walked with him as Enoch had done. What great sadness God said to himself, I will wipe mankind, whom I've created, from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. The world must have become very terrible indeed for God to say that. How it must have hurt him to think of destroying all his creatures and all the beautiful things he had made such a little time before. In his great love, God wanted to try every way he could to save his children from such a dreadful judgment. Perhaps some would turn back to him if they were given one more opportunity. He would gladly wait for just a handful, even 2 or 3. My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal, he said. His days will be 120 years. In other words, God would wait 120 years to see whether anyone would listen to his call to turn away from sin. If such a call was going to be given, somebody must be found to give it. Who would it be? Most of Adam's children were following the ways of Satan. Who could be trusted with such an important task? Was anyone left through whom God could announce his last message of mercy to a doomed world? That was story 1. Yes, it is an interesting story. At the same time, it is a very, very sad story. Those were very powerful words that God spoke. I just hope and pray that God will never say those words to any one of us, boys and girls. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless.